Hello, welcome to the channel. This is the Rhetorical Reader. I'm Michael, and I'm excited to give you my September book report. I am trying something a little bit new this time. I'm going to try to be a little more spontaneous and off the cuff. I'm going to try not to reference my notes as much. It's something I want to really work on as I keep doing this. And I mean, that's what editing's for, right? So we'll see how it goes. September was a bit of a tough month for me mental health wise. It was not great up here, and I don't want to go too far into the weeds with that, but I will say if you are struggling with mental health, get whatever help you can, even if it's just friends and family. It's so important, and it really impacts every part of your life. So just please take care of yourselves. And it did affect my reading this month a good bit. I only finished 4 novels this month, and I read a bunch of other sort of ancillary stuff just to keep myself sane, and we'll talk about all of that. But let me start with the books, because the one thing that I can say about having started this reading journey again is that most of the books that I've read have been really excellent, and I'm only sad about the fact that it took me so long to read some of them, because I gave up on reading for so long. So the first thing that I read this month was The Galaxy and the Ground Within by Becky Chambers. And this is the 4th and final book in the Wayfarers series. And this one follows a group of people who are stranded at what is effectively a galactic rest stop while a disaster plays out in space above them. And there are the rest stop's owner and her child, and then there are 3 people who are passing through, 3 different beings of different species who are passing through, and they all have their own baggage, they all have their own stuff that they're dealing with. And like I've said before about Chambers' work, I think that, again, this book is just so kind and gentle on the reader. And it's not to say that there aren't stakes and that there aren't things happening, but it's very much just a touching examination of the lives of these people and how they sort of come together in a moment of an emergency, and how each of them deals with that while also dealing with everything that's happening to them as individuals. And it's a great rumination on how strangers become acquaintances, how sometimes acquaintances can become friends, how chance meetings can mean something, and how everything that makes us different is also a good thing sometimes. And I'm always so impressed with Chambers' writing, and I'm always so impressed with what she's able to accomplish in, what is a relatively small book. So I'm going to very much miss this series now that it's over. I've loved it. This was, again, a 5 out of 5 for me. And yeah, The Galaxy and the Ground Within by Becky Chambers, definitely a recommendation if you haven't gotten around to this series yet. Highly, highly recommend it. The second book that I read this month was A Marvelous Light by Freya Marske, and this is the first book in the Last Binding trilogy, which, if you were around for last month's book report, you know that I started with the second book in the trilogy, not realizing what I was getting myself into. The good news is that was a 5-star read for me, and I truly loved it, and this one definitely lived up to that. This is another 5-star read for me, and this follows the main character from the previous book, Maud. One of the main characters in this is her brother, Robin, and the other main character is a man named Edwin Corsi. Robin is a civil servant in the English government in 1908, and he is given a new job that he doesn't really know what it's all about, but it's actually turns out that he is now the liaison between the Prime Minister and the secret society of magicians that exists in England at the time. And Edwin Corsi is his counterpart from the magical side. And the two of them do not immediately hit it off. But Edwin was friends with Robin's predecessor, and is confused as to what might have happened to him. And so they work together to begin trying to unravel the mystery of that. Along the way, they reveal to one another that they are both gay men, again, living in 1908 England. It's quite a challenge for them to live as their authentic selves, and they find something of a kindred spirit with one another in this story. And it is a really strong it's a really strong adventure story. There's a really good mystery going on in the back of it. There's also a romance that blossoms between Edwin and Robin, and it's very much couched in sort of that grumpy sunshine dynamic, with Edwin being very cold and sort of cut off from his emotions and from the people around him. There's a good dose of family drama on the part of both men, and trying to live up to expectations, whether those expectations are realistic, self-imposed, however you want to look at it. They're very formative for these two men. So it's a little bit spicy. It's very exciting. I would say that the romance is not as forward in this one as it is in the second book, A Restless Truth, but it's still very present and very important to what's happening between the two characters. But the story and the world building is just as strong as it was in A Restless Truth. I really highly recommend this trilogy. I'm really looking forward to reading the third book, which I'll be doing this month. So again, A Marvelous Light, 5 out of 5 stars by Freya Marsk. Really enjoy it. Can't recommend it highly enough. The next book that I read, I have already actually done a full video about, and that is Miranda July's All Fours. And I wanted to review this book on its own because it was so powerful and interesting. So I'll leave a link to that video in the comments or in the description. But I think that my views on it have not shifted so much as I would say they've solidified since I made that video. What I want to say here, so this is the story of a middle-aged woman. She's 45. She is a successful artist. She is a mother. She is a wife. And she is going through some stuff, trying to figure out who she is and who she's supposed to be at this stage of her life, and whether or not she's happy with the world that she's built for herself. And I think a lot of what goes on in this book is tied up in being a woman at that stage of life, but it's also just something that I think anyone who is approaching that stage of life, who's in that stage of life, will get something out of. And I think that what makes me love this book is how incredibly powerful and emotionally affecting Miranda July's writing is. I was floored sometimes by this book. I was absolutely destroyed by reading it and had kind of an emotional hangover when I finished it that really led me to needing some time before I could dive into anything else. But what truly kept me from embracing this book fully, and I talk about this more in my full review, but I think it's important to just bring up here, is the conspicuous privilege of the main character, and really the conspicuous display of her privilege over and over and over in the story is something that made it difficult for me to fully embrace the character the way I wanted to. So this was a 4-star read for me. I highly recommend it. I think that it is so effective in what it tries to do. And again, I'm just blown away by the power of Miranda July's prose. But I struggled with getting in touch with the main character in ways that I was surprised by. So that is All Fours by Miranda July. Very much recommend. Very good, but with reservations. And the final novel that I read this month is the perfect antidote kind of for what feelings that All Fours gave me, and that is Mistakes Were Made by Meryl Wilsner. And this book is a age gap romance between a college student and, let me just set the scene. So this story follows Cassie, who is a senior in college, and she goes out to a bar one night to effectively look for a one-night stand, and she picks up an older woman, Erin, and they have a really steamy experience together. And then it turns out that Cassie learns that Erin is actually the mother of another girl at college who Cassie is friends with. And the story then proceeds to follow them for the next year of their lives and examines how this relationship goes from being just a one-time encounter that neither of them was expecting and evolves into a genuine relationship where they care very deeply about one another. And that journey of that year is really well written. It's really fun. I would say that the way I describe this book to someone who asked me is that it was dumb and it was sweet and it was heartfelt and it was just really an antidote for feeling bad about anything, because you can't help but feel great when you're reading about these two characters and how much joy they give one another. And it's funny because if you don't like age gap romances, don't read this. It's a waste of your time, because that's the whole central premise of the story. But there's also a lot of really interesting things going on in this book. Cassie and Erin and Erin's daughter Parker, who you meet in the story and is really important, are all openly bisexual, which is not something you get a lot of representation of in media. And so it was nice to see them just out and proud and unconcerned about how anyone took that from them. It's also interesting because I have another viewpoint character who is a middle-aged woman who is questioning her decisions and trying to decide how she wants to live the rest of her life. And I really appreciated the fact that even though this is a very different genre, this is a very different take on the situation, I still really found a lot that I enjoyed in how Erin, the older woman, the mother in the story, approaches how she feels about going through middle age and changing and making new decisions for her life. This book is very, very spicy. If you are not interested in on-page depictions of sexual activity, this is not for you. If you don't like age gap romances, this is not for you. If you just want a very sweet, fun, very queer, happily ever after romance, though, I would definitely recommend it. It was a 4 out of 5 star read for me. I had a blast. I really liked it. That is Mistakes Were Made by Meryl Wilsner. After I finished up my novels for the month, while I was reading, I did other things, but I also went back and I continued the journey that I had started with rereading the old 1960s X-Men comics. And I'm here to say, I think that journey is finished. I read the 3rd volume of the Marvel Masterworks. There's another 10 issues of the original 1960s comics. And I think I'm done with 1960s Marvel comics for a while. I'm just going to say this. If I have to hear Beast refer to another woman in the stories as female, I'm probably going to burn every Marvel comic that I have. It was really upsetting. I did not get any joy out of those old stories, and I am probably not going to go back to them. On a happier note, I also read some things that were way, way, way too young for me. I read, just for fun, I picked this up at my local comic shop just because it seemed really cute, and that is Godzilla Monster Island Summer Camp. And this is a very silly little story about a girl who thinks that she's going to art camp for the summer and ends up instead at a corporate controlled extreme sports camp. And it's is very fun. It's very simple. It was way too young for me to really enjoy it the way I think someone else would. But the art is really cute. It has great diversity representation. It tells a really cute story. It has environmental messaging, and it has monsters. It has lots of big monsters. So I won't say too much about it. Like I said, it was just for fluff. It was just for fun. Like I said, it was a depressing month, and I just wanted to read something happy. I also happened to be out and about, and I came across this, which is a graphic novel adaptation of Tamora Pierce's story, First Test, which, if you are familiar at all with her Tortall stories or Tamora Pierce's work at all, you know she's the one who created Alana, which is one of the formative series I read as a kid. Like, absolutely, the Song of the Lioness was so good. And I think this is the third series set in that world. And the graphic novel, which is adapted by Devin Grayson and Becca Farrow, is really well done. It's beautiful. The art is excellent. I love the style that they created. I love the way they envisioned the world that she lives in. This story, First Test, is about the second girl to try to become a knight in this society that she lives in. It's a fantasy story set in a world where being a knight is a very male-dominated industry. And she decides that she wants to become one and follow in the footsteps of Alana, who is the first girl to become a knight in this world. And as much as I liked the graphic novel and as much as I enjoyed seeing this adaptation, and I was definitely excited when I saw it on the bookshelf, but all it really made me want to do was actually go back and read the novel again. So at some point I may do a retrospective reread of all of the books set in Alana's universe, because they are so wonderful and so formative again to my reading as a kid. And then to round out sort of the comics and graphic novels for the month, and to segue into talking about gaming a little bit. So Chaosium, who are the creators of the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, they are bringing back into print their ElfQuest role-playing game, and I was so excited to see this. That was something I loved when I was younger, but I had never actually read the ElfQuest stories until I was in my 20s, and it's been a while since I looked at them. So I went back and actually reread the first 10 issues of the ElfQuest stories, and I remembered the one thing that I really didn't like about them right off the top, because the story opens with almost one of my least favorite tropes of all in all of fantasy, which is fated mates. And that's very distasteful to me. I'm not a big fan of fated mates, but I do love the rest of ElfQuest. And I think that it is really one of the most exciting Western fantasy comics that have ever been created. And I think that it was probably a story that a lot of people drew inspiration from, and a lot of people were very fond of, or are still very fond of. And I myself, as I was rereading it, I really did enjoy myself. I was reminded how much I loved it and why I valued it so much when I was in my 20s and I kind of discovered it. So really happy to see the game come back into print, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit when that happens. It's still a little ways off. But that segues into the last thing that I read this month, which is another big, chunky, heavy gaming tome, and that is Old Gods of Appalachia by Monte Cook Games. And this game's lead designer is Shanna Germain. I didn't know this when I found out about this game, because when it was pitched to me as basically H.P. Lovecraft in Appalachia as opposed to New England, and I was like, oh heck yeah, I'm all in for that. But this is actually based on a podcast that goes by the same name, Old Gods of Appalachia. And so I started listening to the podcast as well when I found that out, and it's really good. I'm going to leave a link to the podcast channel because they're all up on YouTube. I'm going to leave a link to that in the description as well. But this game takes that inspiration from the podcast, and it's all about sort of, I would say, cosmic folk horror in the Appalachian region in the time frame around 1917 to the early 1930s. And it's brilliantly written. It's such a flavorful book. It's based on the Cypher system, which is Monte Cook Games' in-house sort of created system that was done for their flagship RPG, Numenera. I've never been a huge fan of the Cypher system as it stands. I love the way it makes characters, but I've never been a big fan of the way that it works in practice. But this is a game I absolutely would love to have a chance to play with someone who was really good at running it. I think it's, again, so full of just interesting flavor, and the world is so rich and alive. And as someone who lives just adjacent to the Appalachian region myself and has roots there from my family coming from the Appalachian Mountains, I think it's just so evocative for me, and I really enjoyed getting to read this, and I've really enjoyed the podcast so far. So that is everything that I read in September, and like I said, it was a rough month, but books are always there for us. They always give me joy, and I'm looking really forward to everything that I have to read in October. I'm doing a buddy read with my wife, and I just want to be clear, she has no interest whatsoever in appearing on camera, but I'll probably drop some notes in about the book we read together from her. We're going to read A Fine and Private Place by Peter S. Beagle, which is an old favorite of mine, but it's been many years since the last time I read it, so I'm interested to see how it holds up. But it is a perfect spooky season book, as it tells the story of two ghosts who linger around the cemetery where they're buried, and some other characters who are kind of connected to their story. So I'm very excited to reread that, and I'm very excited to hear her take on it when she reads it. I'm also going to finish up the Last Binding trilogy this month, and so I'm very excited about that. And I'll probably delve into some other horror books, or at least reread some Lovecraft or something this month to go along with spooky season. So that's everything that I have for you this time. I hope that you all are taking care of yourselves. I hope you can be good to each other, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.